Hello and welcome to Tom and Jack Having the Craic. We've a bit of a disaster today on Tom and Jack Having the Craic. Tom is still in America, so he is not here for the podcast. We had two guests booked for today's show. One guest I messaged 5 minutes before we started, and they'd completely forgotten about the podcast. The other guest I then tried to ring, and I realised had sent me an Instagram message at 9 o'clock this morning, said that they were very sick and they couldn't get out of bed, but I didn't get a notification because I don't know anybody who has notifications on Instagram. Am I right, Jonathan? No one has notifications.
That is quite right. I entirely agree.
Instagram.
Grow up and use WhatsApp.
Yes, exactly. So what we're going to do is we're going to mess around here. We may not even ever publish this, but we're going to mess around and we're going to have a bit of a State of the Nation address. And I'm going to tell you how I see the world, and we're going to get Jonathan to chip in from time to time. I suppose the big kind of interesting thing at the minute in society is, you're always, people say that, everyone's always fighting, everyone's always arguing, as if it's a new thing and as if it's something it'll just last for a little period of time and then disappear. It won't. It will always be that way. But I suppose the big thing in the West is there's a very much a pro-capitalist, anti-capitalist kind of thing. Probably the biggest issue in the West at the minute is a lot of people feel that capitalism has become unfair, particularly with the housing market, and that's become a real source of frustration that is kind of leaking out in all other parts of society, and certainly I do think that is something that needs to be sorted out. But my kind of view in all these things is I would be in favour of a capitalist system with socialist safeguards. That would be my thing. I think you always have to be very careful with these, because I would be a big believer in the thing called Pareto's Law, the 80-20 principle, which economically says that in every country in the world you will always have a small percentage of people who will own the vast majority of the wealth. And I think if you look around the world, there seems to be different groups of people who can control a country. You can have a military dictator country, so you can have the army. The strong people will rule the country. I wouldn't like to live in a country like that. You can have the religious people will rule the country, a theological state like you have in Iran. Ireland, to be fair, was kind of a theological state for a while, and that wouldn't be my preference either. I think that's very oppressive. Then you can have a communist state, a socialist state, but I don't think they worked very well either. And then you can have a business state. So you have a state where it's dominated by business people. And I suppose that's what the West really is. The West is a state that's dominated by the business community, whereas, say, somewhere like Iran is a state dominated by the religious community. And where would we say? Where's got I suppose Russia is a state dominated by the army, by the military. And then what other kind of ones do you have then? I suppose there's no real cultural state. There's no real state that is dominated by maybe Mao in China, like that's dominated by cultural dominance. So there's pros and cons to all of them. I think the least worst is probably a business state, but I do think we have to do something about the housing, because I think the fear now is that people become so disillusioned by a state that's governed by the business class that they will eliminate them, and then what will fill the void, I think, will be a lot worse. So I suppose in Iran had a capitalist state that was very involved with America, and the people got pissed off with that, and there was a lot of, I suppose, socialist left-wing students who helped lead that kind of revolution. But then once there was a vacuum power, they didn't have the means they didn't end up taking over the country. The country ended up getting taken over by religious people, and then you see now where in Iran the women are getting killed for protesting for some rights. So that was where students and socialists were attacking the capitalist system. But what they ended up getting was probably worse than what they had before. I don't know. Maybe they don't agree with that. But to me, it looks worse. It looks like you're oppressed in one way, but then you're actually more oppressed. What do you think of all of that, Jonathan?
I say I would agree with 90% of it.
Okay, what's the 10% you don't agree with?
Well, I understood 90% of it. There was 10% that was too outside of my learning brain.
Yeah.
I see you're a man who reads the news and is up to date. And personally, I like to watch Adventure Time and have a bowl of Wheaties every night. So
do you eat Wheaties?
I have Weetabix. I think Wheaties might be...
The Wheaties are the chocolate ones, the little circular ones.
Oh wait, the Mini Bix.
No, like Wheaties are like...
Oh, no, that's Wheatos.
Oh, Wheatos.
Oh, I love those. Professor
They're delicious.
Wheato. He was like an inspiration to me. He was the kind of bright mind I wanted to be growing up. Professor Wheato. He was a...
Oh, the guy, and he has the puzzles on the back.
Yes, yeah. I mean, I never once finished one of those puzzles, but, you know, it was a difficult word search. But one day I aspire to really kind of...
So what are you eating now? Weetabix?
I eat Weetabix. I might have... this morning I had some bread and hummus for breakfast. So
bread and hummus. Okay, yeah, that's not a bad breakfast.
Yeah, it's a bit too Middle Eastern for my... No, it's fine. I'm a Jew. I can say that. It's one of our heritages. Professor Wheato is a famous Jew, and Charlie Chaplin. Those are our two guys.
Professor? No, he's not. Is he Jewish? Well, he's...
Yeah.
Is he Jewish?
Yeah, he's won a Nobel Prize. Of course he's Jewish.
For science.
Yeah.
So going back to the kind of thing about, I suppose at the minute now there's a lot of, particularly in America, you got like fascism on one side and communism on one side, and you know, the other side. That always seems to be like, you know, fascism is the far right, communism is the far left, and I think for most people neither are really appealing. But I think what happens is countries go through economic cycles, and when one group becomes too powerful, then regardless of your beliefs, you want to get rid of them. And I think probably the corporations and the business classes have become too powerful at the minute. The inequality is too high. And if, you know, with house, like there's certain countries, like Ireland would certainly be one of these countries where if house prices keep rising so much disproportionate to wages, it'll become a case that the only people who can afford to buy the houses are funds, are investment funds. And then you see cases where they've done this. I recently read about they did this in Denmark, and there was kickback where the investment fund will buy a lot of apartments, and they might buy a whole block, and then they put upward pressure on rents, but they also don't maintain the flats as well as they were previously maintained. So if you know, without any kind of policy changes, we could end up in a situation where you just end up having a whole landlord class, which will become intolerable at some stage, and then you're going to have some kind of revolution, and then the business people lose their position of power. But then who takes the position of power? Do we go for like a religious organisation that will take it? They're well organised, so in many places, particularly in the Middle East and places like that, where there was many cases where they turned against American capitalism, but the people who were most organised to take advantage of the vacuum were religious organisations. I don't know if the Church of England is very well organised though to take advantage. I couldn't see. Britain could never really go theocratic, but I don't know. I don't know if there would be a revolution in Britain. I think Britain would go more for a slow decline rather than... It's hard to know, isn't it? What do you think of that, Jonathan?
I think we're already in a slow decline.
Britain's been in a slow decline for a long time. I still think the Brexit thing is mind-boggling. Like, I was thinking about it the other day. Like, I think the Brexit vote doesn't seem mad to me. Like, I can see why people were slightly hoodwinked into it. I can see why people in Britain could be sold the idea of leaving the European Union and trying to, you know, kind of revitalise some kind of British empire. But the stuff that happened afterwards just seems madness to me. Like, I don't know if you noticed, like the week after the Brexit vote, Nigel Farage went on Irish television and basically tried to speak to the Irish people and say to them that he thought Ireland should vote its way out of the European Union and you know, kind of get in anything with Britain. And it's sort of like, did he not realise that when the British Empire was at its height and when the British Empire was going, Irish people suffered horribly. Like the British Empire to Irish people, there's no positive to it. Like Ireland had a famine where half the population, you know, lost half its population at the height of the British Empire. So it was almost like a guy going back to his first wife that he had beaten up and abused and saying, "Listen, love, I'll take you back." And she's looking at him going, "Are you fucking mental? Like, why would I go back to you?" Like, so that was just seemed to be, you know, if Nigel Farage, he went to Dulwich College. He should be getting a good education, and I don't understand enough about his arguments for Britain leaving Europe or whether they're good or not. But to me, he showed an incredible lack of intelligence if he thought that going to Ireland and the Irish people would somehow be, let's go and join Britain and help them rebuild the empire. And then they go and ring up India. Like, why would India want the British Empire to come back? Do you know what I mean? I always imagine like Britain ringing up India and saying, listen, we've left the EU and we're going to try and do like a British Empire 2.0. Are you in? I'd imagine India would just hang up the phone and turn to Sri Lanka and say, Pakistan are doing prank calls on us again. Do you know what I mean? Like, why would they want to go back to like the time where they were controlled and robbed? And then they were like ringing up America and saying, we're trying to kind of get a British. Like, why would America help you too? Like they celebrate the 4th of July, the day they celebrate every year, the biggest day. Their St. Patrick's Day is celebrating when they won their freedom from the British Empire. Why would they help resurrect something that they fought against and yearly celebrate its demise? Doesn't make any sense at all. Like, it's just to me, it's completely delusional. Like, if that was the plan, that just seems madness. But beforehand I could give them some kind of benefit of the doubt. But if the plan was to go to all the people who despise the British Empire and ask them to help resurrecting it, wow. And of course, Australia said they'd help them. I think Australia was just kind of taking the piss. Like, do you know what I mean? Yeah, we will sort of help you, but so it's interesting to see like where do you go from here. Also, I suppose in the modern world, you have China has 1 billion people, India has 1 billion people, the European Union is about 500 million. I think America is about 500 million. So these are the people who are competing against each other. They're big population organisations. Well, I don't know if organisations is the right word, but it's almost like Britain has shown up to a football World Cup and it's 11 aside, and they're like, we're just going to play 5 players. We're going to play a 5-a-side game. It's a faster game. It's a more dynamic game, and it's like it doesn't matter. You can't play 5-a-side against 11-a-side teams. Do you know what I mean? So it's very hard to see where Britain's going to go from here. Very hard to see where it's going to go from here. Like, and this thing about the spending money and borrowing money is a very interesting one too. It seems incredible that the markets seem to value British bonds as less than they did Greece, which the only conclusion from that is that the investors thought that the fact that Greece was in the European Union gave it some kind of safety net, whereas Britain isn't in the European Union now. So when they make decisions, there's no one to support them or talk it out of it. Like, it's almost like Greece was drunker, but it was with a big group of friends. Do you know what I mean? So everyone was like, he's a bit safer, whereas Britain isn't as drunk or as legless as Greece, but he's completely on his own. So do you know what I mean? He's more likely to get mugged than Greece, even though Greece couldn't walk. But he had a couple of buddies with him. Do you know what I mean?
I got you.
Yeah, that's a good analogy.
That's
one.
Analogy.
That's a good analogy. That one. So where do you go from here? It's very, very interesting to see what's going to happen. But it doesn't look like there's many opportunities presenting itself to Britain, and I think the going back and rejoining the EU, I think there's far too much pride. I can't see that happening. There's too much pride at stake there. So,
what do you think about the Scots and their independence drive? The possibility of a second referendum, even though it doesn't legally count. But what are you sympathetic to that cause, or do you think that it's kind of a folly? What do you reckon?
I personally, I think they blew their chance. Like, I can't believe they didn't vote for it. So I don't. They have. So obviously, Britain ruled Ireland. Now, Britain was always the London rule was always more sympathetic to the Scottish people than it was to the Irish people, and always treated the Scottish people a little bit better than the Irish people. But like, the Ireland has kind of shown that a small country within Europe can do well, with good governance and the whole lot. And I just kind of think. Yeah, I think they blew their chance, to be honest with you. I do think the big carrot there is the EU, but the difficult side for it is the EU doesn't want to be promoting countries leaving countries, because then you have Catalan, you have Basque, it creates all sorts of other problems. But your hunch would kind of be that if they had a vote again, would they vote to leave? Because I think so much has happened since. Do you know what I mean? Particularly, well, Brexit was the big thing. Like, the whole campaign for the Scottish referendum was better together, and then afterwards you're leaving the EU. So you've completely contradicted the message you were selling to one group of people. And I suppose if the economy keeps going the way it is, I think the other thing that's kind of fascinating now is, I think in the West we sort of started to think that world wars would never happen again because we wouldn't fight one. But I think we're slowly realising that it doesn't matter. Like, it's easy not believe in a world war when you're the dominant group. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's easy for America not to believe in another world war because they are the ones that dominate. But the countries trying to get to the position of world domination, they will believe in it because that's how you get there. So I think you see this thing now where Saudi Arabia looks like it is kind of aligned itself with Russia. So if you got Russia, China, and Saudi Arabia, if they start building an alliance to take on the West, and China's ambitions are certainly to become the world power and to replace the organizations that are American based, like the World Health Organization, the World Economic Forum. All of those kind of organizations are basically they're international organizations, but they all have an American tone of voice, and they dominate the world, and China wants to replace them with their own things. So it's an interesting one. It kind of, if you look through all the history, there's a lot to be said that since World War II and now. Certainly since World War II, between World War II and 9/11, there was kind of this sort of period of, but again, this is a Western perspective, there was this period of great stabilization and peace. Obviously, if you were in Vietnam or you were in Afghanistan or different countries like that, you wouldn't see it like that because they didn't have peace. But that seems to be a long stretch, certainly for European countries, of no war. And maybe we know we had a pandemic now, and maybe we're kind of going back to where life would be a little bit more like it usually is: chaos, war, and a lot more fight. And I suppose we have economic war. We've always have economic war is going on the whole time. And this thing now is very interesting with Biden and China, where he's trying to hold them back on technology. Have you read about this?
Is this limiting us using like Chinese tech over here in the West, or is it what they can develop? Or
it's what they can develop.
No,
a lot of it's semiconductors. So basically, the American companies are now no longer allowed to sell certain technological parts to Chinese companies. And if you're a company that deals with America or American companies, you're not allowed to sell parts.
So America wouldn't buy from an English company if they sold those parts to China?
Yeah. And what's really interesting about it is they're saying that semiconductors seem to be the big kind of focal point. And that's what's most important for a computer, and then you got quantum computer, and then I suppose advanced next generation weaponry and weaponry systems.
That's all the microchip stuff, right?
All the microchip, yeah, exactly, yeah. So I was reading about it the other day, and seemingly this is where it's very, very interesting. Seemingly most of the world's microchips and semiconductors are produced in Taiwan. Which means that, a lot of people think, like, if China was to invade Taiwan and take it back, a lot of people kind of think, okay, well then, would America actually get involved? Because it's a small country, would it really matter? But if they're producing most of the microchips and most of the semiconductors, and that is the resource that is most pertinent to developing the next generation of technology and quantum computers and quantum weapons and all this kind of stuff, then it suddenly that Taiwan is a much bigger, much more important place than without that. So it would kind of mean that if China did invade Taiwan, America would have to fight back because it couldn't afford to lose the resource of those microchips and semiconductors.
Could it afford to go to war with China in that context there?
Well, I think it can't afford. I think it couldn't afford not to.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? Like, and I think maybe Taiwan have been very shrewd in realizing that is their biggest protection, is having that. And I suppose the big fear for Taiwan is if they start changing their supply chain so that they no longer have to get that resource from Taiwan, then Taiwan would be fucked. You know what I mean? That's their big protection. Like, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So they keep keeping it like that. But it very, I suppose like a lot of it now is, I think for a long time you kind of look at it and you think that whether wars will happen is, it's the politics of the West. But actually it's not. It's the politics of China and Russia. It's really mainly the politics of China, what decisions they make. Have
you heard the theory? I'm sure you have, about how there's actually a kind of a soft Cold War going on now, fought over, like culture and technology. So something like TikTok, that's being used by China to essentially weaken and corrupt the minds of Western youth by promoting certain values, as opposed to the values they promote on the same platform in China, such as the benefits of being studious and engineering and all that kind of stuff.
I've heard that. I don't know if that is exactly true.
Sure,
I think it makes sense, because I do know what is true. I do know that China is actively buying media around the world. Like I read before that I think in somewhere like Ghana, that the Chinese own most of the state media in Ghana, and they are actively going around all around the world trying to buy up media. And there was a controversial thing that they stopped doing it. The Telegraph had a deal with some Chinese organization, might have even been the Communist Party, where they would have a monthly supplement about China. And I don't know how much they were getting. They were getting a lot of money for that. And then when that kind of became a bit more public, it stopped. But China isn't like being underhand in this. They're being very open about this. They're basically saying that they are going around the world. They are paying journalists and media, and they want to spread the story of China. And then there's the big controversy with the Confucius Institutes, which are in universities. There's one now in Dublin, UCD, and they basically pay to have institutes within universities teaching the story of China. And it's not a state that it's a state that lies. Like, let's be honest about it. It's a state that lies, and they're going around the world spreading that message, and then you have to kind of wonder, at one point it's. I suppose we've kind of reached the point where at one point it was sort of like, okay, they're lying to their own people. Okay, it's not, that's not really our concern, or that's not really our issue. But as they move from wanting to just be the main power in their own country to wanting to be a more global power, or a more certainly regional power in Asia, then they're starting to spread their message more, and they are starting to spread their influence. But yeah, we're definitely in a sort of a hearts and minds Cold War, and I suppose the kind of bit that is very hard to quantify or to figure out is how much of the debates we're having online are being manipulated, instigated, pushed or tweaked or nudged in this direction or that direction by states like China and Russia. They're definitely involved. They're definitely involved in social media. They have and they're in their own country. They're doing it very effectively. So they are going to be doing it on a global stage. I have read where, like, in social media in China, while there's a lot of censorship, but there's also, they have people who work for the state who, if a topic starts trending on one of the social media apps that they are allowed to have, so if a political kind of scandal or something that they don't want to talk, they have a team of people who will go into that app and will turn the conversation to somewhere else, like will drown out the conversation that was appearing organically. So they have an ability to do that. They've been doing that in their own country, and I'm sure it makes sense for them to try and do that elsewhere.
I think that thing happens here with Twitter anyway. You have certain things that are So not in a kind of illegal conspiratorial way, just kind of more in a that like a story will be suppressed. Or if you go back to the this is a kind of the classic one, the Hunter Biden laptop one, and Mark Zuckerberg was like, yeah, this is when he was on Rogan's podcast. He's basically saying, yeah, I think this is right. The FBI told us to limit this story from being shared, even though it transpired to be a true story. So you do get tech companies kind of drowning out stuff that trends or stuff that gets shared around under various influence, which is in some ways completely insane, and in other ways it's like, well, it's kind of their company. I guess they can do what they want, but it always has a skew, I suppose.
It always, but it is basic politics, and even like if you were to have two politicians in a small town, they will both be doing that. So if someone starts talking about, oh, do you remember the time he paid? He lost us all that money because he built that library and he got ripped off by those construction workers, and he'd be like, yeah, but he's trying to change the story to a different story that makes him. So like the politicians are always doing that, and the media are always doing that anyway. So that like those kind of, I suppose, debating contests are going on all the time. But I guess with social media and when a state has people hired to do that, it just seems a bit more sinister. But I suppose it's not really any different than what we already have with journalists and media and everybody like that, because it just seems a bit more organized, because like there's plenty of people on Twitter and on Facebook and on social media here, like public personalities and stuff who will have their own kind of agenda, but it's more organic. Do you know what I mean? It's not like they're not directly getting paid by the state, but they have agendas that they support, because it's I suppose if I was worth 10 million and I lived in nice houses and I had a great life, I'd be very pro the status quo. Do you know what I mean? I'd be like, do you know what I mean? I don't think you'd have to pay me, if I was on social media, I don't think you'd have to pay me directly to be constantly defending how things are right now, as opposed to changing it to a system that would see me destitute. So that's just obvious personal self-interest. But I suppose it gets a bit more nefarious. I guess the big disappointment, like I'm 40, I guess the big disappointment of the internet is, like I remember when I was a teenager and the internet slowly coming, the first big disappointment of the internet was it was so slow at the start. Do you know what I mean? Do you remember like you had to dial up and everyone talked about...
I love that noise.
And there was all this sort of chat about the internet, and like then you get it. I remember getting the internet in my house. I might have been about 14 or 15 or maybe, and quite a lot of excitement that we were getting it, and then we got it, and it quickly became a massive anticlimax. It was very slow to load up, and then the only thing that was really on it were chat rooms that were fucking boring as fuck, to be honest with you. Like they were, it just seemed to be other teenagers on them, and they were nonsense, and everything was kind of, so it was basically, you were basically texting people that weren't your friends. That was the internet, and it was quite boring. But at that time there was a lot of sort of I suppose that seems like complete naive optimism now that the internet was somehow going to make things more democratic, and it was going to lead to more equality, and it was going to destroy hierarchies and the establishment, and it was somehow going to make our lives freer and everything. But now I think it certainly hasn't. I don't think it's happened in the West. It seems to have. It certainly has happened in China. But now it seems like the internet is like the perfect tool for authoritarianism. It looks like, because if you really want to run an authoritarian state and keep that control, the internet's perfect.
Well, you're connected to every single...
You're connected to everything. Your ability to watch everything, your ability to manipulate, like, it's incredible. Like, it's the perfect tool. Like, it's almost... And that just seems so bizarre, that how it started off as like... It almost started off as like this kind of hippie utopian dream. And now it just seems like, the perfect tool for a dictator.
I mean, that is it's entirely a double-edged sword, isn't it? I mean, for every kind of manipulation that goes on, top down from the state over social media, there's also somebody who, has grown up in a third world country who now has a very basic smartphone, who can kind of educate themselves for free on YouTube and maybe get themselves out of a state of either poverty or illiteracy or whatever it is that they would not have had without the internet. So it really does go. It has its benefits and negatives, but
absolutely, yeah, absolutely. Oh, yeah. It's still,
and the porn. Oh my goodness.
Well, I still think I still think the pros outweigh the negatives. Like, I still feel like that. I think, I suppose it just shows you how important politics is, like in grassroots politics is, because you have this powerful thing, but you have to make sure that the people who are in charge have some degree of responsibility. So that's probably the thing, really, isn't it? That it's, I suppose it's like nuclear weapons, like, you want the people who have them to have some degree of responsibility. But nuclear weapons, you got the nuclear paradox, where they led to the less wars happen because of the existence of nuclear weapons, because it was so powerful. So maybe the internet is a bit like that. It sort of it creates the idea and the fear that you could have a very powerful authoritarian state that would be very hard to dismantle. But actually, it's been that's just something that is possible, but may never happen, and that the benefits outweigh the outweigh the fear of what could go wrong.
For sure, and the genie is certainly out the bottom.
You can't go back.
Exactly, with the internet and nuclear bombs.
You can't go back. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, it's
paradigm shift.
Yeah. Now, I don't know enough about technology, but I have a few friends who do, and they say that this quantum computing is just gonna, like, if we think it's just gonna make everything we have now seem like an abacus. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? That it's just gonna be, and that'll interest. I'm getting to an interesting age now, because I'm 40, like, and I'm slowly getting to that. Everybody likes to think they're going to be different than the herd, or they're going to be different than previous generations, or they're going to be different than everybody else. But I'm slowly getting to an age now where I'd be losing interest in new things. You know what I mean? I'm kind of getting, listen, I know what I know. I know what I like. I'm not keeping track with anything anymore. Like, you know, what I mean?
That's because stuff's gotten worse. Like,
what?
That's because stuff's gotten worse.
Yeah, but I don't agree with that. I don't think things have gotten worse. I don't think, you look at culture and music and entertainment and everything like that. I think, the music and the culture that existed when you were a teenager, or in your kind of formative years, or your early 20s, will always seem the most exciting to you. But that's because you were at your most emotionally unstable.
Your limbic system was growing, and it was kind of...
it's growing in unison with it. And, like, I was thinking about this the other day. Like, I'd find it there'd be very few cultural entertainment things that would really excite me. Like, I think it's nearly impossible for a movie to come out that would absolutely excite me to the point of, I cannot wait to see this movie. I cannot wait to see this movie. Do you know what I mean? Same with music. Like, I can still enjoy movies and music, but I don't get excited. I don't think I'll ever get excited the way I did in the past and that's not because it's got worse. I think that's because I
think it's kind of a bit of both, because yes, obviously when you're growing up in your teenage years, those are the formative records and movies that really kind of like shape your interest, and you become so attached to them. But I think with the kind of cultural output today, you look at, and this is again due to technology, like the medium is very much the message. When you have a platform that just promotes really, like something like TikTok, that promotes really short, ephemeral, throwaway things, yet it's the most addictive, there is less reason for like people to make great stories, because that's not what the market's wanting.
I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that at all, because, like, okay, so the one example I give you is, like, something like Game of Thrones, which came out in the internet age, is amazing storytelling.
That's true.
Like,
Fair
do you know what I mean? And I do think, like, I watch Game of Thrones and I think it's good, but I do think if I was I often think when I watch it, if I had been a teenager watching Game of Thrones, like, I would have been absolutely blown away.
Yeah, that's fair enough.
Do you know what I mean? So I do think they still exist, and I think like the social media is just like, it's white noise, really. Like, it's just like, it's the, you know, I suppose, like, when I was a kid, you know, magazines were big when I was a kid, like, you know, the Beano, the Dandy, Kerrang magazine.
I was in the Beano once.
Were you?
I dressed up as Roger the Dodger and sent him my picture. Yeah.
So there you go. So, like, magazines, like, social media has kind of replaced magazine, you know, like, so.
True, but it's so everything's become so hyper and condensed and like become a super stimulus. It's just squeeze that little bit of dopamine out of your brain.
Squeezing the dopamine out of your brain, yeah, but you know, people. This is the thing. Like, the world around us changed, but we don't. From a physiological and chemical and anatomical, did I say all those words right?
I think so.
Point of view, we're not changing. Like, we don't change that much. We think we are, but like, we're not changing that much. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, teenage, the kind of hormonal, emotional journey teenagers go to become adult is still kind of the same.
That's true. Although, to go back to kind of like the, I guess, a neurological perspective, are we not sort of physically rewiring our brains a little bit with this constant stimulus to a degree that we always were, say, like, I don't know, through gambling or through, I don't know, being a sex addict or whatever, but now everybody has access to this technology all the time, and it is designed to be
addictive.
Yeah.
Yeah,
so we are
yeah.
rewiring our brains and our reward centers and stuff to an extent. And I say we, you know,
collectively, yeah. It's a tricky one. It's and I suppose another one that's very interesting is, you know, the idea of history repeating itself. And again, you look at the geopolitical. So, like, you know about the Opium Wars. The Opium Wars, basically, where the British flooded China with opium, and in China they call that their century of humiliation. And I wonder. You hear a lot about the fentanyl and the opium crisis in America, and I don't know if this for certain, but I think a lot of that's coming from China. So they're kind of using a trick that was used on them back in them. So there's definitely, I suppose at some stage the internet's going to have to be regulated. But I don't think it's happened yet. I don't think society has collapsed yet.
Agreed.
But there's definitely, like, phones, you wonder, they have to be affecting productivity. But then it's also, like, certainly if you look at Britain, like, Britain's issue is lack of investment. Like, you know, the truth of it is, have you ever heard of the thing about rat experiment, rat park experiment?
Yes, yeah, with the cocaine and the leader.
Yeah. So basically, when they basically said the cocaine was extremely addictive because they gave it to rats, and the rats did the cocaine until they died. And then someone came along and said, well, you put the rat in a cage, it had no other stimulus, it had an option between no stimuli or cocaine, so it did the cocaine till it died. But how would the rats react if they had a park where they could play, where they could socialise, where they could do other things?
They had their needs met.
And the cocaine was there, yeah, and they didn't get addicted, and they didn't do the cocaine until they died. So that shows the other options. So while the phone and all that might have all these things, but it's you know, you're not going to get rid of the phones, you're not going to get rid of those dopamine hits. So the solution is to create other options and better environments outside that for people. And I suppose the way you do that is through training, education, opportunities, all of that kind of stuff.
And community. I totally agree there. You have, there's a study done on, I'm probably talking out of school here, but there's a study done on people who became addicted to morphine or heroin after having surgery, after having it, and those that didn't. And almost in every occurrence, the people who did get addicted to it, they either had a history of childhood trauma where they didn't get a certain amount of, maybe like love or attention growing up. Yeah, and it's almost predictable who and who wouldn't. So it really does seem like with a lack of some either kind of structure in our brains that gets programmed into us when we have the right, in quotes, right environment growing up, you're then way less susceptible to addiction and other things as well. So I agree, the way these technologies aren't going away, we just need to have basically a society where people have enough going on and feel connected enough to not get down this
too
path,
too sucked into it. And the big addiction now is gambling. That's the big, and it's so hidden, you just don't see it. But like, again, I could be, as you say, quoting out of school here. I'm not sure, but from what I read, seemingly that's the one that's the most destructive at the minute, and it's completely hidden. No one really knows who's doing it or who's not, and that's the phones. That's the whole lot too, And I suppose so. It's just like, I suppose the bottom line is, I think you just need a capitalist system with some kind of safeguards and strong institutions and the whole lot. I was kind of thinking that, like, you need a sort of I suppose the big problem is when people get too powerful, then they just become so much dominating, and that, I think that's the big problem. Like you saw it with the oil companies used to buy up green energy companies when they were small, and they would kind of amalgamate them into the company, but then they would just slow down the whole process. So it's just but it's so hard. Like, how do you
keep your enemies close?
Yeah, how do you control people, control organizations and people when they reach a point of too much power? And like, you've seen it even, I think America's bringing in rules now that make it. I was reading this the other day about Facebook with Meta. So they've definitely brought in rules about acquisitions. So Facebook doing a lot of its growing by just buying everyone. They buy Snapchat, they buy Instagram. Do you know what I mean? Like, you buy up all the competition. So that kind of, and I think they've brought in rules now. So they're trying to do this Meta, the virtual reality company. But one of the big hurdles they're going to have is they're not going to be able to do it the way they did with social media. And I think you need kind of natural competition. Like, the rest of us would be all very better off if the company, you build this company and it blows up, and then it always reach a point where the innovation plateaus. And what would be best for us is if the company just disappears then and gets replaced by the other one, rather than that big company just keeps buying up all the new innovators. Do you know what I mean? And incorporating them in.
Yeah.
But and then, have you ever seen donut economics? Donut economics, I think, is really the future, and I'm surprised not talked about.
Just what we call the American economy.
No. Donut economics is not the American economy. Donut economics is this idea. So you got your donut, right? And a donut has a small circle and a big circle, right? So the small circle is the level of resources people need to live a dignified, I suppose, fulfilling, satisfying life, right? Below the donut below that line is like homelessness, it's poverty, it's not being able to afford to get educated, not being able to afford to eat. So we need to try to get everybody up to a point where they can have some kind of satisfying, dignified life. And then the second line is the amount of resources we can use without irreversibly damaging the planet or causing adjustments in the climate of the planet that would make it detrimental to human life. So we need to learn to live within the donut. It's a good one, isn't it?
No, I understand that.
And they become your parameters,
Yeah. I guess the problem is it's the circle around the hole, so the smaller one. That, I think, is relatively easy to measure. Like, what does the average person need? They want, they don't want to be stressed about food. They don't want to be stressed about, like, not being able to work or whatever. Their health is covered and all that kind of stuff, and they feel satisfied. Whereas the outer layer, I think that's such a huge chaotic state of affairs to try and get one's head around. It's very hard to tell. Like, the further out you live, yes, you're using more resources, but you're probably driving more innovation at the same time. So work it out.
I think it can be calculated.
Okay.
I think it can be calculated because it can be calculated through maths. Like, I don't think it's, with all the things we can know about space from using mathematical, I think it can be calculated.
Okay.
I think having the political will to, like, the issue will be like the people who want to live beyond that outer line have power. So that's your difficulty. Like personally, I think the whole climate change. I think there's two outcomes here. I think we get lucky, and we get a technological solution, or I think there will be mass devastation, mass loss of life, mass migration. And that will lead to, I suppose, like a kind of like a World War II thing where it's just so horrific that then there's a reset. But I think, like obviously there are policy changes and everything happening, but I just don't think it. I don't think there'll ever be the motivation, the drive, or the political will to make it happen quick enough. I think we have to see. I think as humans, we have to see the bad consequences of our actions before we change. And I also think habits are very hard to change. I think it's very hard to change habits. Like, at an individual level, people who get told that if you keep smoking, you're going to die, they struggle to quit smoking. People who are told, like, if you keep eating sugar, you're going to lose your leg through diabetes. They struggle. People really struggle to change their habits on an individual level. So the idea that on a collective level that we can all change our habits and the way we operate, I just can't see it happening. Cannot see it happening.
We better get inventing then.
Well, yeah. Well, listen, I really think our only hope is technology. Is some kind of, I don't know, maybe the quantum computers. Yeah. Maybe the quantum computers will figure it out. But I don't see, but I do think there will be, like, what is it, Pakistan, 1/3 of Pakistan is flooded now. And the Pakistan, and this could be very interesting too, like, because I think there's politicians in Pakistan who are talking about suing the states that, and that could cause, something like that could cause change, because that's what happened with the tobacco industry. Like, if countries that are polluting more and are put more carbon, if it got to a stage where there was a court, an international court that did say, yeah, you owe this country money, and they had to pay it. So then there are incentives then to change your behaviour.
Fair enough. I'm actually not fully aware of this. I know. Obviously, there's been terrible floods, but what caused the flooding in Pakistan? Was it man-made industry, or was it?
Well, they're saying it's climate change, isn't it? Like,
right.
Okay, I think 1/3 of the country is flooded, which just seems. I've never been to Pakistan, so it just
a third of the country.
Yeah, I read it. Do you know what? I'm nearly certain I read that, but I've even thought that just seems crazy.
Imagine a third. It's bigger than England, right? It's considerably larger.
Yeah, so that's basically, if a third of England flooded, that's like, okay, so the M25, from the M25 down, that whole part flooded. Yeah. It just seems.
God. I mean, if it happened to the Midlands, okay, fair enough. I'm joking. That is absolutely.
It just seems, yeah, stunning. And they are saying that that they're going to. There was already meant to be agreements where the richer countries who have benefited the most from the burning of fossil fuels and resources have to start transferring wealth to the ones who are going to suffer.
Right.
But this could bring it more into focus, and I do think there are politicians in Pakistan talking about legal action against, we've had.
And who would enforce that?
Well, I suppose it would have to be an international court, but I suppose one of the things, how would it look? You had I don't fully understand this, but how it would work. But it could be something like, and these type of things will always seem unimaginable. I know there's the thing about the guy. It was in Chicago, actually. I think it was a Jewish lawyer after World War II. He made it like he made laws against killing people in wars that actually then ended up holding up. I don't think there was war crimes and stuff like that, and that had a big impact. That You know,
Yeah,
it could be
changed warfare and
changed warfare, like
diplomacy and
yeah, it's weird how like a legal kind of thing changed warfare. Now, I suppose you know, people can argue for the most powerful countries like America, it didn't change it so much for them, but like for smaller countries, it became an issue. Like a smaller country wanting to invade its small neighbor was suddenly like, well, you can do it, but you will go to court after this, and you will face consequences. So in that kind of way, it worked a bit. So I guess with this kind of thing, it would be you've made an agreement that not to limit your carbon output. You broke that. This country's now having flooding. So is who do you sue? Like, is that someone that you're liable for?
Who sues the sueman?
Yeah. How does it work? You know, so that could be interesting too.
Call in.
Call in and let us know what you think of that one, viewers. But so one of the things that's really that they say now is going to cause us a lot of problems with the climate change is this falling out with China and America, where now the really for like what we really need for climate change is certainly China and America working together. We need all the powerful people working together, and that now looks like a few years. I think for a long time. I think there was a long time where America was probably indulging China a little bit because there was this belief that at some point we're all going to have to work together to solve climate change. And now I think there's probably a belief that China was playing along a little bit like it. I think there was always this belief too that as the country became more affluent, that it would veer towards Western values of liberalism and that, and it hasn't, and if anything, it's now moving in a different direction, and actually there was a lot of maybe naivety and delusion that we could all work together.
I've also heard so the main kind of narrative seems to be that China is really just effectively just smashing it, all of its industry, all of it, its economy and everything like that. But I've also heard there's a real population problem in China as a result of the one-child policy, a generation or two ago, where they just don't have enough people to sustain its own country. And I know that sounds ridiculous because it's such a big population.
Yeah, I've heard this too, that basically they've built an economy that needs a certain amount of growth to sustain, but unless they start expanding outwards, they won't be able to maintain that. And that to keep control of the country they have, they need to expand beyond their borders.
Which is where they're...
Well, they don't necessarily have to take over other countries, but they have to have influence. Yeah, they have to have influence. And they have a lot of influence in a lot of places. Like they have a lot of influence over Hungary and Greece within the EU. They're buying. Don't they own a lot of ports in Greece? They're giving money. They're giving a lot of money to Hungary to help it run the country. They go to Africa and they go to the
developing buildings and
developing buildings. Yeah, so they go. I think what they do is they go to Africa. They go to an African government and they say, "Listen, you need money to develop your infrastructure. We'll lend you the money."
Yeah.
And then they use the money to hire Chinese people to come over from China to build it. And then you now owe them the money. And if you can't pay them, they go, "That's fine. We'll just take this port, or we'll take some kind of state infrastructure."
Are they expecting for it not to get paid back?
Well,
soft invasion.
I think it doesn't matter.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? But like, it's a soft invasion, but it's exactly what America's been doing to us all anyway as well. Like America's been, here's some money. Don't worry.
Soft invasion is what I did when I drank too much whiskey the other night.
Soft invasion. But so they do that, and also they I think now China has an annual thing where they go to Africa and they get all the heads of state to Africa, and they basically say to them, "Listen, you've tried the Western system of capitalism. It hasn't been very fruitful for you. Why not try our system? Look what we've done in China. We've taken hundreds of millions of people out of poverty and given them a quality of life, which is not true. Try our system." So they're like you said, it's a Cold War. We're now at a place like it's a game of you know that game Go. Have you ever seen that game? It's a Chinese game. Where you have the black and the white chips, and basically when you surround the chips, they go then your color, and that's what we're in now. We've got America and China, who will now. There could be, in a bizarre sort of way, there could be a bit of a benefit to us in this, because America will have to be a little bit nicer to the countries it influences. And I suppose the big harsh thing that we all feel is we feel that the American capitalism has become too liberal, too free market, too ruthless, too harsh. And maybe they'll have to rein that in a little bit because, you know, if you had a situation where you had a country like Italy and Italy was like, do you know what, your system isn't working for us, we've been chatting to China, and you know, then America's like, okay, hey, hang on a minute, what is it, how can we tweak our system to kind of
I'll be nicer.
I'll be nicer, yeah, you know, and like countries like Italy where, you know, there was a bit of Russian influence, you know, they were flirting with communism at different times. And America had to. So you're right. Like, we're in a Cold War where it's a battle of ideas and wits. And you know, like, I suppose I'm Irish. I would be very biased towards the American side. Like I don't like the Chinese system. I wouldn't like to, you know, this social credit, and I think it's very oppressive. But also I think that Ireland would always do better with the American system because there's Irish people there. So it's complete bias. Like, I'd imagine Chinese people would rather the Chinese system wins, but there you go.
If you look at Hong Kong, I think it's kind of split down the middle, right? You have people who are wanting to have the mainland principles and, you know, all the laws, and you have half the people who kind of want to stay as a Western
country. Yeah. And but that, I think that'll start to happen everywhere. I think you will have pockets, not pockets. I think you'll have percentage of people in this country, in every country, that'll want one system or the other. There will definitely be people in this country who would think, do you know what, the Chinese system would suit me better. I would do better in that system. I would rather that system. Do you know what I mean? You. On a 5. You know, there will be people who find the system we have, the capitalist system. There will be people who find it extremely difficult to function under, and find it very unfair and they will probably think, there will be some people who think, actually, my personal well-being and that system would suit me better. Absolutely, there will be. You know, I wouldn't be one of them, like, but there will be.
Yeah.
You know.
The old world.
So yeah, but you have that. But I think, like, this, the other thing about it, I think, you know, if you read history, this stuff is a constant. Like, it's, you know, this kind of sort of push and pull and this system, that system, and I think it's as, you know, it's as normal as breathing oxygen. Like, it's something all humans have always faced, something we always will. And my kind of philosophy in a lot of these things is not to get too into it. Do you know what I mean? I think I would never be, you know, I'd never be too on either side. I'd be very much in the center. Like, I'd be very much in the center. My attitude to a lot of these things is just live your own life and try get as much fun and enjoyment out of the cards you've been dealt as you can, and so on, and you know, try be as nice, a decent person and understanding person as you can. And like, I always remember when, you know, when I was first learning about different episodes in Irish history in school, and you'd be hearing about this revolution or that revolution, I'd go home and I'd ask my dad, like, you know, what was your granddad doing, or what was my family doing? And my dad was like, he was fucking going to work trying to you know, trying to feed his family. He didn't give a fuck. He didn't, not that he didn't give a fuck, but he wasn't getting involved. He wasn't interested in it. Like, do you know what I mean?
You want to tend to the garden you can touch, focus on your life and
yeah, and exactly, like, work on the things you can't control. And I think with all these, certainly with revolutions and everything like that, like, Ireland has had plenty of revolutions, and you know, if you read and you look into it, like, a lot of the people who get swept up in the romanticism of the whole lot end up with a lot of regrets about it. Like, it can, you know, it can always seem very simple that, you know, you have an establishment that you disagree with, you feel they're treating you unjustly, this, that, and the other, and then, like, let's just get rid of them. But, like, something always has to replace that, and often the thing that replaces this, and, you know, sometimes better the devil you know than the devil you don't. Like, would the people of Iraq rather to go back and still have Saddam now? Do you know what I mean? Even though, like, he committed heinous crimes, but was their quality of life better? Do you know what I mean? So it's very hard to get these things right. So I think having any kind of certainty about it can be very, can always end up being very foolish. So I would be very, I would never really have. strong opinion. Like when I was younger, I would have had very strong opinions on things. You know what I mean? Like I would be, I'd be very quick to see that this is my side of the argument and be very gung ho about it. But then you often end up feeling kind of foolish, like because you never really know. You never really know enough. Do you know what I mean? I read a book about Thinking Fast and Slow about psychology.
Yeah.
And have you read that? Do you know that book? Yeah.
A bit of a slog, but I got through it.
Yeah, oh, it's an amazing book.
Oh, it's incredible. It's just so many studies, one after the other.
Yeah, it's a tough book. It's one of those books like you read a bit and then you have to stop and think about it for a while. Like
Fast or slow?
Fast or slow, Thinking Fast or Slow, yeah. But you do, like, you can't read it too fast. No. And Daniel Cowman, is that how you say his name?
Daniel
Canahaman?
Daniel something.
Daniel, yeah, unbelievable. But he has a thing in the book which I remember reading and just thinking it's so true. Like he said, like most of the time, like people are asked a question, they'll always give an answer, but they substitute the question for an easier question because the answer to most questions should be, I don't have enough information to know the answer to that question. And the one he does is like, which of these two people will make a better president or prime minister? And the reality is the most accurate answer most of us should be given is, I don't know enough about these two people to answer that. But he said, like, what people do is they substitute it and they just go, who do I like?
Well, exactly.
Who do I like? Or I like the way that person dresses or something like that. So certainty, you just don't know, do you? Like, you just don't know. And that was Tom and Jack having the crack State of the Nation special with us, Jack Hester and Jonathan. How do you say your surname again?
Cogan,
Jonathan Cogan on the ones and twos. Thanks for keeping me indulged, Jonathan.
Thank you for having me.
We may not post this, but if we do, who knows? Super. That was actually a bit of fun at the end. I'm glad I did that.